The first light of dawn painted the ridgeline in gold as I adjusted my camera settings. Perfect. The mountains revealed themselves slowly through the morning haze, like ancient beings awakening. I captured 3 quick shots, knowing the light would change in seconds. My name is Alex Mercer, and for 15 years I've photographed landscapes that most people never see. The remote corners of our world where human footprints are rare and fleeting. This assignment in the Northern Cascades was supposed to be routine, a 2-week solo trek to document seasonal alpine meadows for a conservation magazine. I checked my GPS coordinates, 7,800 feet elevation, exactly where I needed to be for tomorrow's sunrise shoot. My pack felt heavier than usual, the extra camera gear digging into my shoulders despite the padded straps. I'd done this countless times. The solitude was the point, just me, my cameras, and whatever nature decided to reveal. The weather report had mentioned afternoon cloud cover, but nothing concerning. I'd camped at this elevation dozens of times, knew the patterns, the dangers, the protocols. I set up my tent on a relatively flat patch of ground, anchoring it securely against the persistent wind that whipped around the mountain's shoulder. I thought of Rachel then. My sister would have loved this view, the valley stretching below, the distant peaks emerging through cotton candy clouds. She'd always been the more enthusiastic hiker between us, practically dragging me up my first serious mountain when I was 15 and she was 17. "You coming back for Dad's birthday next month?" Her last text message still sat unanswered on my phone. Reception was spotty up here anyway. I'd respond when I got back to civilization. The afternoon brought the forecasted clouds, but they moved in faster than expected, thickening rapidly. I decided to secure additional guy lines on my tent. The wind had picked up considerably, carrying a damp chill that penetrated my layers. As I hammered in the last stake, the first drops of rain hit my jacket. By dusk, visibility had dropped to less than 50 feet. The rain turned to a fine, penetrating mist that seemed to approach from all directions. I retreated to my tent, reviewing the day's photographs on my camera's display. The last image showed the clouds building in the distance, ominous but not unusual for these mountains. I fell asleep to the gentle patter of mist on nylon, confident in my equipment and experience. The sound that woke me wasn't natural, a sharp crack followed by a deep rumbling. I sat bolt upright, disoriented in the perfect darkness. My watch read 2:17 a.m. The ground beneath my tent shifted, subtly at first, then violently. Rockslide. I scrambled for my headlamp, my boots. The movement lasted only seconds, but I felt the ground beneath one corner of my tent drop away. Heart pounding, I unzipped the tent door and peered into absolute nothingness. The mist had thickened to fog so dense, my headlamp merely illuminated a wall of white vapor. I needed to move. Now. Throwing essential gear into my pack, GPS, first aid kit, water filter, extra layers. I abandoned the tent and backed away from what I sensed was the edge of a fresh drop-off. The darkness and fog combined to create perfect disorientation. I couldn't see the stars, couldn't make out the ridgeline, couldn't tell which direction led to safety. I checked my GPS. No signal. I tried my phone. Nothing. 3 steps forward, testing each footfall on what felt like increasingly unstable ground. My headlamp caught something, the edge of the rockslide, freshly exposed earth. I changed direction, moving parallel to what I hoped was the mountain face. Then the ground disappeared beneath me. Weightlessness. A moment suspended between stability and chaos. Then impact, brutal, disorienting, knocking the breath from my lungs. I tumbled, pack catching on something, spinning me. Rock scraped against my left side, tearing through my jacket. My headlamp smashed against stone and went dark. I came to rest against something solid. For several seconds I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. When my lungs finally remembered their purpose, each inhale brought stabbing pain to my left rib cage. The darkness was absolute. "Hello?" My voice sounded strange, muffled by fog and shock. No response except the soft patter of mist and my own ragged breathing. Inventory. I could move my fingers and toes. Good. Sharp pain in my left side with each breath, likely bruised or cracked ribs. Something warm trickled down my forehead. Blood. My left ankle throbbed dully when I flexed it. I fumbled for my pack, which had somehow stayed attached to one shoulder. The backup flashlight was there, miraculously intact. Its beam cut through the darkness, revealing my situation. I had fallen down a rocky slope, perhaps 30 feet. Above me, the mist swallowed the beam. Below, more darkness. The GPS was cracked, screen dark. My phone showed no damage, but still no signal. The compass in my watch remained my only reliable navigation tool. I needed to assess my injuries properly before moving. First aid. I pressed a gauze pad against my forehead, wincing at the sting. The bleeding wasn't severe. Scalp wounds always bled dramatically. My ribs protested as I wrapped them with an elastic bandage, tight enough for support but loose enough to breathe. The ankle was swollen but bore weight. Not broken, probably just sprained. Water, 2 liters in my pack, plus the filter. Food, energy bars, dried fruit, trail mix, enough for 3 days if rationed. Shelter. The emergency bivy sack was intact. Clothing, 1 spare set, plus rain gear and insulating layers. I was alive, injured, disoriented, but alive. Dawn brought no improvement in visibility. The fog remained impenetrable, transforming the mountainside into an alien landscape. Rocks and stunted trees loomed out of the whiteness like sentinels. I couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. My watch compass indicated I had fallen to the northeast of my campsite. The logical choice was to head southwest, back up toward the trail. But the slope above looked treacherous, loose scree and near vertical in places. In my condition, with limited visibility, attempting to climb could be fatal. Downhill then. Follow the water's natural path to lower elevation, where the fog might thin, where search parties would likely look first if I didn't return on schedule, which wouldn't be for 13 more days. 13 days. The thought sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the damp cold. I secured my pack, tested my ankle with weight, and took the first painful step downward. Every step required concentration. The fog played tricks with depth perception. What looked like solid ground sometimes wasn't there at all. What appeared to be a gentle slope could suddenly drop away. My ankle protested with each impact, and my ribs sent sharp reminders of their damage whenever I breathed too deeply. I marked my path with small cairns every 100 steps, though I doubted their usefulness in this blank world. The moisture in the air condensed on every surface, my face, my clothes, the rocks, making everything slick. Twice I slipped, catching myself painfully against stone. By midday, I'd covered perhaps half a mile, though it was impossible to be certain. The fog occasionally thinned enough to reveal glimpses of my surroundings, unfamiliar terrain, steep drops, tangled vegetation. I was definitely off any established trail. Focus on the next step, I muttered to myself, Rachel's words from our first difficult climb together. Not the summit, not the bottom, just the next step. Rachel. The thought of her sent a wave of emotion through me. Would she be the one to report me missing when I didn't answer her calls? Would she blame herself for letting me go alone again? The fog thickened as afternoon faded toward evening. Temperature dropping. I needed shelter before dark, before hypothermia became a real threat. My clothes were damp from the mist and sweat, and the wind had picked up, cutting through the layers. A dark shape materialized in the whiteness ahead, too geometric to be natural. As I approached, it revealed itself as an old mining equipment shelter, half collapsed but offering some protection. The Northern Cascades had been mined extensively in the early 1900s. Remnants of that era still dotted the backcountry. The structure's roof had partially caved in, but one corner remained intact. I cleared debris from the floor space, rotted timbers, rusted metal, decades of accumulated pine needles. The exertion sent pain shooting through my ribs, but the physical activity generated welcome warmth. No fire tonight. Everything was too wet, and I couldn't risk depleting my limited matches and tinder. Instead, I arranged my emergency bivy sack in the driest corner, adding pine boughs beneath for insulation from the cold ground. I changed into my dry base layers, carefully preserving the damp ones inside my jacket where body heat might dry them somewhat. Dinner was an energy bar and carefully rationed sips of water. I needed to find a water source tomorrow. The sound of running water had been constant during my descent, but the fog had concealed its location. In the absolute darkness of the shelter, pain became my companion. My ribs throbbed with each heartbeat. My ankle had swollen further despite the compression wrap. The cut on my forehead stung from dried sweat. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by discomfort and the unfamiliar sounds of my temporary refuge. Wind through broken timbers created eerie whistles. Something small scurried across the floor near my head. The temperature dropped further, my breath forming visible clouds in the beam of my flashlight. I dreamed of Rachel. We were kids again, hiking the gentle trails near our parents' cabin. She was laughing, pointing at something in the distance I couldn't quite see. "Come on, Alex, it's not that far." But when I tried to follow, my feet wouldn't move. I woke shivering violently, the cold having penetrated my inadequate shelter. The luminous dial of my watch showed 4:37 a.m. Moving was agony, but necessary to generate heat. I did careful stretches within the confines of the bivy sack, working circulation back into my extremities. First light brought no improvement in conditions. If anything, the fog seemed denser, clinging to the mountainside like a living thing. I forced down another energy bar, allowing myself slightly more water. The need to find a source had become urgent. Packing my meager shelter, I stepped back into the white void, straining to hear the sound of running water. There, to the left. I adjusted course, moving carefully over increasingly steep terrain. The sound grew louder, then suddenly I was at the edge of a stream, swift-moving, clear mountain water cascading over rocks. I filled my bottles through the filter, the simple act requiring painful contortions with my injured ribs. The water was ice-cold, numbing my hands within seconds. I drank deeply, then refilled the bottles. Hydration would be critical for healing and maintaining energy. With water secured, I reassessed my situation. 3 priorities. Continue descending to where help would most likely search, find better shelter against the elements, and somehow signal my location if the opportunity arose. The fog showed no signs of lifting. I was truly lost in the misty mountains, each step a journey into whiteness. The terrain changed subtly as I continued downward. Fewer alpine features, more vegetation. The slope grew steeper, channeling me between increasingly narrow rock faces. The sound of the stream grew louder, suggesting it dropped more dramatically ahead. By midday, I realized I was entering a canyon system. The fog still limited visibility severely, but the echoing water sounds and the way the wind funneled through suggested steep walls on either side. This could be dangerous. Canyons in these mountains sometimes ended in sheer drops, but following the water remained my best chance of reaching lower elevations. My pace slowed to a painful crawl. Each step required testing the ground ahead with my trekking pole, which had survived the fall. My ankle had stiffened overnight, bearing weight only reluctantly. The pain in my ribs had settled into a constant burning sensation that flared with any sudden movement. The stream beside me had become a proper creek, gathering volume from unseen tributaries. Its voice changed from gentle babbling to urgent rushing. I followed cautiously, always maintaining safe distance while keeping it in earshot. Mid-afternoon brought the first real challenge of the canyon. The path ahead disappeared into the creek itself, the narrow walls forcing the water between them with no bankside to follow. I would need to wade or find another route. I tested the water with my pole, deep in the center, perhaps waist-high, and moving fast enough to be concerning. The temperature would be dangerously cold. Mountain runoff rarely exceeds 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Immersion could trigger hypothermia within minutes. Looking up, I could barely make out the canyon walls through the fog, but they appeared climbable, at least for someone uninjured. In my condition, attempting to scale them carried significant risk. What would Rachel do? I asked aloud, my voice strange in the muffled acoustics of the canyon. She would assess, adapt, and move forward. Always forward. I found a fallen tree limb of suitable length and tested its strength. It would serve as a secondary support while waiting. I removed my boots and pants, storing them in my waterproof stuff sack, then secured my pack high on my shoulders. The first step into the water stole my breath, cold beyond cold, a burning sensation that quickly numbed my foot entirely. Carefully, testing each placement with both poles, I entered the current. The water reached mid-thigh at its deepest, the force of it threatening to unbalance me with each step. My legs lost sensation entirely, becoming clumsy appendages I could barely control. The crossing took less than 5 minutes, but seemed eternal. Reaching the opposite bank, I couldn't feel anything below my knees. I needed to restore circulation immediately. Despite the pain in my ribs, I forced myself through recovery exercises, vigorous rubbing, gentle bouncing, flexing my toes inside my soaked socks. Slowly, agonizingly, sensation returned in waves of pins and needles. Once I could walk again, I dressed quickly in my damp clothes. The exertion had at least generated some body heat. I needed to keep moving to maintain it. The canyon narrowed further as I continued, the walls closing in until they were barely 20 feet apart. The fog, trapped in this natural chimney, swirled in ethereal patterns. The creek, now forced through an even tighter space, had become a series of small waterfalls and rapids. Late afternoon light, what little penetrated the fog, began to fade. I needed shelter again, but the canyon offered few options. The walls were too steep and slick for climbing to potential caves or overhangs. The narrow floor provided no flat spaces for bivouacking. Then I saw it, a dark horizontal line across the canyon wall, ahead. As I approached, it revealed itself as a narrow ledge about 15 feet up, with what appeared to be a shallow recess behind it. A possible shelter if I could reach it. My first attempt to climb failed immediately, my injured body refusing the demands I placed on it. The rock face was slick with condensation, offering few reliable handholds. I would need to be smarter. I backtracked until I found a fallen tree wedged between the canyon walls. With considerable effort, I freed a straight section about 12 feet long. It wouldn't reach the ledge directly, but might get me close enough to grab the edge. Positioning the makeshift ladder against the canyon wall, I tested its stability. It shifted alarmingly, but held my weight. The climb sent waves of pain through my ribs, each movement a fresh agony. 8 feet up, 10, 12, the end of my ladder. The ledge remained just out of reach. One chance. I balanced carefully, then jumped upward, arms extended. My fingers caught the edge of the rock shelf, sending a shower of pebbles down as I scrambled for purchase. For one terrible moment, I hung by fingertips alone, legs dangling. Then muscle memory from years of climbing kicked in. I pulled upward, ignoring the screaming protest from my ribs, and rolled onto the ledge. The recess behind was deeper than it had appeared from below. Not quite a cave, but enough to provide shelter from wind and mist. Dry pine needles had collected in the back, blown in over years. Perfect kindling if I could get it to light. Night fell as I arranged my minimal camp. The ledge was wide enough to lie down on, with the recess providing a ceiling of sorts. I gathered the driest needles into a small pile near the entrance, where any smoke would dissipate. After 3 attempts with precious matches, a tiny flame caught and grew. The fire was small, barely larger than my palm, but its psychological impact was enormous. Light, warmth, a focal point in the endless white void that had become my world. I fed it carefully with the driest materials I could find, knowing it might be my only fire for days. As I huddled near the flames, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge my situation for the first time. I was seriously injured, lost in extremely difficult terrain, with limited supplies. No one would look for me for nearly 2 weeks. The persistent fog made aerial search unlikely to succeed. I was truly alone. Dawn arrived as a subtle lightening of the fog. My fire had died hours ago, leaving only cold ash. Every muscle in my body protested as I uncurled from my bivy sack. The night had been long, punctuated by pain and half-formed dreams where I called for help, but no sound emerged. I performed a careful self-assessment. The cut on my forehead was scabbing properly, no signs of infection. My ribs still radiated pain with each breath, but the intensity had leveled off. My ankle remained swollen, but functional. Hunger had become a constant companion, a hollow sensation beneath my breastbone. I studied my supplies with clear eyes. 5 energy bars, a handful of dried fruit, half a bag of trail mix, 2 liters of water, plus the filter. First aid supplies, minimal shelter. If I rationed extremely carefully, the food might last 5 days. After that. The canyon continued downward, the only feasible path. Climbing out in my condition wasn't realistic. I had to keep following the water's course, hoping it would lead to lower elevations where the fog might thin, where trails might exist, where people might pass. Descending from the ledge proved nearly as challenging as the ascent. I lowered my pack first, then eased myself down until I hung by my hands, dropping the final few feet to land awkwardly on my good ankle. The impact sent fresh pain through my ribs, leaving me breathless for several minutes. The canyon floor had narrowed further overnight, forcing me to wade through shallow sections of the creek repeatedly. Each immersion in the frigid water sapped more body heat, more energy. By midday, I was shivering constantly despite movement. The fog played cruel tricks. Shapes appeared and dissolved. Sounds echoed strangely, sometimes seeming to come from behind when the source was ahead. Once I was certain I heard voices, distant calls that made me stop and shout in response. Nothing but my own echo answered. "Keep moving," I told myself. Rachel's voice seemed to overlay my own. One step at a time. Rachel, what would she be doing now? Teaching her geology classes at the university, probably, unaware that her brother was lost in the kind of landscape she studied professionally. The irony wasn't lost on me. The canyon began to widen slightly as afternoon progressed. The creek spread out, becoming shallower and less forceful. The walls receded, their tops still hidden in fog, but their bases further apart. The terrain underfoot changed from bare rock to soil supporting sparse vegetation. I was descending, making progress. This knowledge provided a thin thread of hope to follow. A new sound gradually emerged from the white silence, a deeper rushing than the creek beside me. A larger water source ahead. River or waterfall, I couldn't tell, but it represented change and potentially a way out of the canyon system. I followed the increasingly loud sound until the creek I'd been tracking joined a much larger river that cut across my path. The canyon had opened into a broader valley, though the fog still limited visibility to a few dozen yards. The river was substantial, perhaps 30 feet across, running fast and deep. No crossing this one. I would need to follow its course instead. But which way? Downstream seemed logical, continuing my descent. But rivers in mountain regions often cut through impassable gorges. Upstream might lead to gentler terrain, possibly even human habitation near the headwaters. I studied what little I could see of the river's behavior. The water moved with purpose but not violence. No white water visible in either direction. The banks appeared manageable. Downstream, then, continuing the descent. The walking was easier along the riverbank. More vegetation provided stable footing, and the slope had gentled considerably. My pace improved despite growing fatigue and hunger. I allowed myself half an energy bar at midday, savoring each small bite. Late afternoon brought a startling discovery. Through a momentary thinning in the fog, I glimpsed a structure on the opposite bank, unmistakably human-made. As I hurried closer, the fog closed in again, but not before I'd confirmed it was a cabin of some sort, set back about 50 yards from the river. I called out, voice cracking from disuse. "Hello, is anyone there? I need help." Nothing but the river's constant voice answered. I called again, louder, ignoring the pain in my ribs. Still nothing. The river was uncrossable here, too wide, too deep, too cold. I needed to find a ford or some other way across. I continued downstream, searching desperately for options, but found none before darkness began to fall. I made camp in the shelter of a fallen cedar near the riverbank. No fire tonight, everything was too wet, and I needed to conserve matches. Dinner was another half-energy bar and a few pieces of dried fruit. My stomach cramped with hunger afterward, unused to such meager offerings. As I lay in my bivy sack, the cabin tantalized me from across the uncrossable divide. Shelter, possibly food, maybe even communication equipment. So close yet unreachable. Sleep came in fragments, broken by pain and the constant sound of the river. In my dreams, I stood at Rachel's door, unable to knock, unable to call out, while she moved about inside, unaware of my presence. Morning brought a subtle change. The fog, while still present, had thinned enough to reveal more of my surroundings. The river valley stretched ahead, flanked by steep forested slopes. The cabin across the water was clearly visible now, a simple structure with a metal roof and small porch. No smoke from the chimney, no movement visible. I needed to cross this river. The cabin represented my best chance for survival. Shelter at minimum, possibly supplies, maybe even communication. But the crossing would be dangerous, perhaps fatal, if attempted directly. I spent the morning scouting downstream, looking for narrower sections or natural bridges. A mile further, the river widened into rapids, eliminating any crossing possibility there. Upstream then. The journey back past my previous night's camp was demoralizing. Each step felt like admission of defeat, a retreat rather than progress. But I had no choice. 2 miles upstream, I found what I was searching for, a section where the river narrowed and several large boulders created a potential crossing point. The gaps between stones were significant, requiring jumps of 4 to 5 feet in places. With my injured ankle and ribs, each jump would be painful and risky. But the alternative was worse. I secured everything in my pack, then wrapped it in the emergency bivvy for additional waterproofing. The first boulder was accessible from shore with a careful step. I tested it, found it stable despite being slick with spray. The next jump was the first real test. 4 feet across fast-moving water to a flat-topped rock. I gauged the distance, ignored the pain, and leapt. Landing sent shock waves through my injured body, but I maintained balance. 1 down. The middle of the river required the longest jump, nearly 6 feet to a somewhat smaller target. I hesitated, calculating consequences. A miss would mean immediate immersion in frigid water, moving with enough force to sweep me downstream into the rapids I'd seen earlier. Almost certain death from hypothermia or drowning. "You've got this," I heard Rachel say, so clearly I almost turned to look for her. "You've always had the stronger legs." I backed up as far as the rock allowed, took 2 quick steps, and jumped with everything I had. For a moment, I was airborne above the rushing water, time suspended. Then impact, jarring, painful, but successful. My momentum carried me forward onto hands and knees. Pain exploded through my ribcage, momentarily blinding me. I remained frozen in that position for several minutes, waiting for the pain to subside to manageable levels. 2 more jumps remained, each slightly less demanding than the previous. I completed them methodically, finally collapsing on the opposite shore, exhausted but triumphant. The cabin stood about half a mile upstream from my crossing point. I approached cautiously, now able to see it was weathered but well maintained. A seasonal fishing cabin, perhaps, or a hunter's outpost. No vehicle visible, no clear access road. "Hello?" I called from 20 yards away. "Is anyone there? I need help." Silence. I approached the porch steps, noting the absence of footprints in the thin layer of pine needles covering them. The door was secured with a simple padlock, substantial enough to deter casual entry, but not impenetrable. Breaking in would be a last resort. I checked all windows first, finding them securely shuttered from inside. The rear of the cabin revealed a lean-to woodshed, stocked with split logs and, crucially, basic tools hanging on the wall. The ethical calculation was simple. Breaking the padlock constituted property damage, but my life was at stake. I selected a pry bar from the woodshed and returned to the front door. The hasp securing the padlock yielded with surprising ease, suggesting it had been forced before and repaired. The cabin's interior was simple but well equipped. A main room with wood stove, table, chairs, and basic kitchen setup. A small bedroom off to one side. No electricity, no running water, but a hand pump at the kitchen sink suggested a well beneath. Most importantly, the cupboards contained food, canned goods, rice, pasta, dried beans, a survival cache that represented life itself. I found a notepad and pencil in a drawer and wrote a detailed note explaining my emergency situation, promising to report my entry to authorities and make restitution to the owner upon my return to civilization. I pumped water into a kettle and lit the wood stove with precious matches. The simple act of making hot food, a can of beef stew heated on the stovetop, brought tears to my eyes. The first warm meal in 3 days tasted better than any gourmet restaurant offering. After eating, I conducted a thorough inventory of the cabin's resources. No radio or communication equipment, unfortunately. A basic first aid kit with supplies to properly clean and dress my head wound. Extra clothing that smelled musty but would serve as dry layers. A kerosene lamp for light. Maps of the surrounding area tacked to one wall. I studied these maps intently, trying to determine my location. Without knowing exactly where I'd fallen or how far I'd traveled, it was difficult to pinpoint, but certain features seemed familiar. If my calculations were correct, I had descended into the Whisper Creek drainage, at least 15 miles from the nearest marked trail. The cabin was labeled Erickson's Outpost on the map. The discovery was sobering. Even if search parties were looking for me now, which they wouldn't be for at least another week, they would focus on areas much closer to my intended route. I was well outside any likely search pattern. I would need to self-rescue, or at minimum reach an area where encountering other humans was possible. According to the map, an infrequently used Forest Service road lay about 7 miles downstream, where the river valley widened considerably. That would be my target once I had recovered enough strength. Night fell as I built up the fire in the wood stove. The cabin's solid walls and roof represented luxury beyond imagining after my previous shelters. I found a logbook in the bedroom and read entries from the cabin's visitors, mostly seasonal fishermen who visited during summer months. The last entry was dated 6 weeks earlier. In my own entry, I detailed my situation more thoroughly than in my initial note, including information about my planned route, my fall, and my injuries. If I failed to reach help, at least this record would exist for whoever came next. Sleep came easily that night, deep and healing, wrapped in borrowed blankets on a simple cot. For the first time since my fall, I felt hope flickering like the flames in the wood stove. I stayed at the cabin for 3 days, allowing my body to recover while consuming minimal supplies. The fog remained constant, sometimes thinning briefly before closing in again. No chance of signal fires being spotted in these conditions. My ribs improved marginally, still painful but less debilitating. My ankle responded well to regular cold compresses from the river and proper wrapping with supplies from the first aid kit. The cut on my forehead healed cleanly. I established a routine, mornings for cabin maintenance and repair, my way of thanking the unknown owner. I fixed a loose shutter, reorganized the woodshed, and cleaned thoroughly. Afternoons for planning and preparation, evenings for rest and reflection. On the 3rd night, I dreamed of Rachel more vividly than ever. We were back at our parents' cabin, sitting on the dock as we had countless times as teenagers. The lake was mirror still, reflecting perfect mountains. "You shouldn't have gone alone," she said, not looking at me. "I always go alone. You know that?" "After what happened to Dan, how could you?" Dan, my former climbing partner. The memory I'd been suppressing since the fall suddenly broke through. We had been descending Mount Baker in deteriorating weather 2 years earlier. Standard procedure, nothing particularly technical. Dan was 30 feet ahead on the snowfield when the surface collapsed beneath him, a hidden crevasse. I heard his shout, saw him disappear. We were roped, but the shock loading as he fell ripped the anchor from the snow and pulled me toward the same hole. I self-arrested instinctively, ice axe driving deep. The rope went taut between us. For 20 minutes I held that position, calling down to Dan, receiving increasingly weak responses. Search and rescue was hours away. My position was failing. The choice became clear: cut the rope or be pulled in after him. I didn't cut it. I would never cut it. But my anchor failed as the sun-warmed snow continued to deteriorate. I was pulled 3 feet closer to the crevasse edge before managing to set another arrest. By then, Dan's responses had stopped. When SAR arrived hours later, they recovered his body from 120 feet down, hypothermia and internal injuries. The official report called it an unavoidable accident. No one blamed me, except myself. In the dream, Rachel turned to face me, her expression unreadable. You go alone because you're punishing yourself, but you're punishing the rest of us too. I woke with tears on my face, the cabin dark except for the dim glow of banked coals in the stove. The truth of her dream words resonated painfully. My solo expeditions had increased after Dan's death, longer, more remote, more dangerous. A form of penance, perhaps, or tempting fate to balance the scales. By morning I had made my decision. I would leave the relative safety of the cabin and attempt to reach the Forest Service road. My injuries had improved enough to travel, and the map gave me a clear destination. 7 miles downstream, a day and a half of careful hiking, then potential rescue. I packed thoughtfully, enough food for 3 days, the emergency bivvy, first aid supplies, fire-starting materials, water. I left everything else neatly arranged, along with a final note updating my plans. The fog had thinned somewhat as I set out, revealing perhaps 100 yards of visibility, a significant improvement. The terrain along the river was manageable, mostly level with occasional rocky sections to navigate. My pace was slow but steady, my body functioning better after rest and proper nutrition. By midday I had covered nearly 3 miles, the river valley gradually widening as the map had indicated. The fog continued to lift in patches, occasionally revealing glimpses of the surrounding mountains. I recognized certain features from the map, a distinctive bend in the river, a tributary stream entering from the east. Late afternoon brought the first sign of human presence since the cabin, an old blaze mark on a tree, the kind used to mark boundaries or trails. I followed these marks as they appeared, realizing they indicated a faint path paralleling the river, likely a fishing access trail that would eventually connect to the Forest Service road. As daylight faded, I made camp beneath a rock overhang near the river. With dry materials collected during the day's journey, I managed to build a small fire, the first I'd made entirely on my own since the accident. Its warmth and light seemed like a beacon of civilization in the wilderness. Tomorrow would bring the final push to the road. If the map was accurate, if my calculations were correct, if my body held up, I would reach it by mid-afternoon. From there, it might be days before a vehicle passed, but the road represented a direct connection to the outside world, to rescue, to home. As I added another small branch to the fire, I thought of Rachel again. Not the dream version, but my actual sister. Her persistent texts, checking on me. Her invitations I, too, often declined. Her understanding despite my withdrawal after Dan's death. "I'm coming back," I whispered to the flames. "I promise." First light revealed a transformed world. The fog had lifted completely overnight, replaced by crystalline clarity. Mountains surrounded me, their peaks catching the first golden rays of sunrise. The river glittered like scattered diamonds. After days in the muffled whiteness, the sudden definition of the landscape was almost overwhelming. I broke camp quickly, eager to take advantage of improved visibility and my own renewed purpose. The trail I'd found became more distinct as I continued downstream, showing occasional signs of maintenance, cleared blowdowns, crude log bridges over tributary streams. My body had found a new equilibrium with its injuries. Pain remained a constant companion, but a familiar one now, its patterns predictable. I established a sustainable pace, 30 minutes of movement followed by 5 minutes of rest. The miles accumulated steadily. By late morning, the character of the forest began to change. The subalpine species gave way to larger, more mature trees. The understory grew denser. Bird calls multiplied and diversified. I was descending into lower elevations, just as planned. Midday brought the first distant sound of mechanical origin, the faint but unmistakable growl of an internal combustion engine, far away but audible in the still air. A vehicle on the Forest Service road, perhaps, or logging equipment beyond. The sound faded before I could determine direction, but its mere existence represented hope. The trail widened as afternoon approached, showing more frequent use. Boot prints appeared in muddy sections, some old and weathered, others relatively fresh. I was approaching active human territory. Then suddenly I emerged from the forest into a clearing with a distinct double track cutting across it. The Forest Service road. Exactly where the map had indicated, exactly as I had hoped. A simple wooden sign confirmed, FS Road 2174, unimproved, seasonal use only. I had made it. The road showed recent tire tracks, perhaps a day old based on the partial drying of the impressions. I needed to maximize my chances of encountering a vehicle. According to the map, the road eventually connected to a more major route about 5 miles east. That would be my direction. The walking was easier on the road's relatively even surface, allowing me to increase my pace despite growing fatigue. Each step now had clear purpose. Each step brought me closer to certain rescue rather than deeper into uncertainty. Late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of an approaching vehicle. I moved to the center of the road, waving both arms despite the pain in my ribs. The green Forest Service truck that rounded the bend was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. It slowed, then stopped entirely as the driver, a woman in uniform, assessed the unexpected figure on her road. "I need help," I called, my voice breaking with emotion. "I fell in the mountains. I've been lost for 7 days." She was out of the truck immediately, professional training taking over as she noted my condition. "Alex Mercer?" she asked, stunning me into momentary silence. "Yes. How did you—" "Your sister reported you missing yesterday when she couldn't reach you. Said you always check in weekly, even on extended trips. We just started organizing search parameters this morning. You're pretty far off your filed route plan." Rachel, always watching out for me, even when I tried to disappear. The ranger, Linda Cortez according to her nameplate, helped me into the truck's passenger seat. The simple comfort of cushioned support brought tears to my eyes. She radioed our position and my condition, then began the slow drive toward the ranger station. "You're incredibly lucky," she said as we bounced along the rough road. "Another day and the storm system moving in would have made finding you nearly impossible. How did you end up this far west of your planned route?" I explained briefly. The unexpected rock slide, the fall, the disorienting fog, the canyon journey, the cabin that had saved my life. She nodded, familiar with the territory and its challenges. "That's Erickson's place. He's a retired ranger who'll be happy his supplies helped save a life. And that fog, we call it the ghost blanket around here, can last for weeks in certain drainages. Disoriented a lot of experienced people over the years." At the ranger station, medical assessment confirmed what I already knew: bruised ribs, sprained ankle, minor lacerations, dehydration, and fatigue. Nothing life-threatening, nothing permanent. I would recover completely with time. They let me use the phone. Rachel answered on the first ring. "It's me," I said simply. The silence, then the sob on the other end, contained everything we couldn't say aloud. "I knew something was wrong," she finally managed. "You always text back within 3 days, no matter how remote you are. Always." "I'm okay. Banged up, but okay. They're bringing me down to the hospital in town for observation, but I should be released tomorrow." "I'm already on my way, 4 hours out." Of course she was. She had always been that way, moving toward action while others were still processing information. "Rachel," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Thank you for knowing when to look for me." "Thank you for finding your way back," she answered. "Don't make me do this again, okay?" "I won't," I promised, and meant it in ways she couldn't yet understand. Not alone, anyway. The mountains would always call to me, their solitude, their challenge, their perfect indifference to human concerns. But I had been granted a rare second chance to understand what truly mattered. Not testing limits or seeking atonement, but the connections that anchored me to the world beyond the wilderness. As the ambulance carried me down from the mountains toward town, I watched the landscape transform through the rear windows. The misty peaks receded into the distance, still beautiful.